Hey everyone, today I'm going to show you part 1 of how I made this seascape pop in Lightroom.
Here I am where the movie started, facing at a photo they've taken. Space tree flying through the skies and petals apple everywhere.
Hey everyone, I'm Josh Mills. Welcome to another video. If this is your first time here and you want to learn more about photography, master your retouching, and all kinds of other photography related stuff, start by going ahead and hitting that subscribe below and make sure to hit that bell notification icon so you're notified anytime I upload a new video. Alright everyone, let's go ahead and jump on in. Today I'm working in Adobe Lightroom CC Classic, but I will be only working with the basic adjustments. I will be doing a second episode of this going into the advanced adjustments. I will link that up in the corner or down below in the description for you so you can go ahead and see the advanced adjustments I do later on. Today I'm only going to stick with the 9 basic adjustments. These are the same adjustments that you will have in older versions of Lightroom. So let's go ahead and jump on in. I shot this several years ago, but it's very flat and blah. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into the basic adjustments and bring some life into this image. So the first thing I want to do is I want to see if my exposure is going to help any here. I really don't want to make it super bright because I want to keep that stormy feel to it. So as I come up, I see that it really blows it out. And if I go too dark, it doesn't really lend anything to it. So I'm actually going to zero that out. And then I'm going to go down and I'm going to look at my contrast. Contrast basically affects the lights and darks relationship. The lower you go on the contrast, the closer the lights and darks are, and it gives you a very flat feel. The higher you go on the contrast, it pushes your lights and darks out to the ends, and it creates a very contrasty look. So it makes your darks really dark and your brights really bright. I don't want to go extreme on this, so I'm probably only going to bump it up 5 or 6 just to give it a little bit. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to the highlights. The highlight slider affects only the brighter parts of the image. So it's going to affect like the waves and the clouds, but it's not going to affect the darker areas of the rocks. So I'm going to play around with that and see what we've got going on here. Now, my intent here is I really like these clouds, but I want a lot more detail to them. So I'm probably going to bring those highlights way down, and it's going to give it that moody feel, but also bring a lot of detail back into the clouds up here. Looks like even dropping it down to a -100 still looks nice to me. I'll probably counteract that with the white slider in a minute, and I'll explain that. My next step is I'm going to go to the shadows, and on the shadows, I'm going to play around and see about opening up the shadows a little bit on the rocks just to show some of the detail. So as I'm looking down through here, if I go really far, the shadow slider affects the darker sides of the images. So you can see how the rocks got much darker. Or if I bring it up, it brings out all the details in the rocks. I don't want to go to 100 on this because it gives it that fake HDR look. All I really want to do is open up the shadows a little bit on the rocks. So I'm probably looking at that 20 to 25 range. So we'll drop it right in there. I'm happy with that. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into the whites. The whites are going to be the brightest areas of the image. So you can see that it will really blow things out or it'll really dull things down. So the whites, what I'm really focusing here on is the crests of the waves and these brighter areas in the clouds. I want to give them a little bit of pop, so I'm going to give them a pretty good boost, but I'm not going to go extreme. So let's drop down here, and looks like that 45 range is a nice spot for me on that. All right, so the next step I'm going to go into is actually going to be the blacks. The blacks are going to be the darkest areas of the images, the blacks of the images. So if I open up the blacks, you'll see that it kind of flattens out the image. If I take the blacks way down, again, it blacks out everything that's really dark in the image already and gives it a very ugly, high contrast feel. So on the blacks, I do want to make the blacks really deep, but I don't want to go extreme with it, so I'm going to play with that, and I don't want to lose the details that I've brought back in the rocks from the shadow slider, so let's say maybe -30. So we've got a nice contrast going on here. All right, so the next thing I want to do with this image, I know I've brought some of the detail back by opening or dumbing down the highlights in the clouds and bringing up the shadows in the rocks, but I really want to give a texture to it. Now, in the newer versions of Lightroom, we have these texture and other sliders they've added, but in older versions, we just had clarity. So that's all I'm going to work with today. So I'm actually going to give a little bump to the clarity. What the clarity actually does is it does micro contrast. So it looks for all the small details that have contrast. So a dark area next to a light area, and it increases that contrast in that small area. So we're going to go ahead and bump this clarity up, and if I go really extreme, you can see it gives it almost that fake posterized look. I don't want that. If I go really far to the opposite end, you see it washes out all of the detail and gives it almost this ghostly, dreamy look. That's not what I'm going for here. I want to have that extra detail, so we're going to go ahead and bump that clarity up. And it looks like once I get up between that 40 and 50 range, I've got a lot of nice detail, but it doesn't look really fake posterized. So I'm going to leave it at that for now. All right, so the next two options I have is to bring some color back into the image. There's two approaches to this. One would be saturation, one would be vibrance. I tend to only use the vibrance because the vibrance affects only the muted colors in the image, whereas the saturation is a global color adjustment and it affects all the colors across the entire image. So I'm going to bump up this vibrance and see if I can bring a little bit of color back into the clouds and into the green. And yeah, I'm just going to bump it just a little bit, so somewhere in that 15 to 20 range. So where I'm at now, I'm pretty happy with this, and that's just the basic adjustments. Like I said before, this was part one of 2 parts, and in part 2, I'm going to go ahead and go into some advanced adjustments to take this even a step further. But first, let's go ahead and look at the before and after here. So this is our image before any adjustments over here on the left-hand side, and this is our image after just those basic adjustments on the right-hand side. And you can really see the difference here. And let's go ahead and bring that up. So you can really see how I've brought all this detail back into the waves and all this detail back into the clouds, opened up the shadows in the stones, brought some more color in, and just overall gave this image a lot more depth and pop. We're going to take that one step further in the next episode, where I'm going to come in and do some additional tools like go into the HSL and adjust the colors and luminance and saturation. And I will also add some gradient tool to really make the sky pop and to really adjust those rocks independent of each other. So make sure to check out episode number 2. I'll be putting a link here in the video, and I will also be putting a link down in the description so you can find that video easy. Thanks for joining me.